Hi everyone. As you all know, we are in a worldwide lockdown situation due to the coronavirus. And last night I got interested to look more into the form or morphology of the virus. And I found some interesting images to look at. So first thing is, let's look at some of these. And I'm not a biological expert. I'm an architect and a designer, but after looking at the morphology of the virus, I was interested to model this parametrically so that we can also look at this as a topological model, right? So the main features of the virus seems to me that it's spherically symmetrical, and it has these tentacles that are protruding from the surface, and it has these sorts of appendages that helps it attach to, I think, healthy cells in the lungs and other types of tissue. So it's not going to be a regular tutorial session in this one. I'm just going to simply walk you over how I went about modeling this virus. But basically, I think the goal was to get a spherical model first that we can achieve by subdividing an icosahedron. As you know, icosahedron is more like a polygonal model. So if I enable this one, you can see that the shape that I started with is pretty much regular triangles. And then I'm using Weaverbird's mesh subdivision tools. This one I used the loop subdivision, which doesn't give like a perfect spherical shape, but it gave me a chance to actually control these tentacles that I wanted to locate at the intersection of the triangles. And to find them, first thing is I actually made a dual of the mesh so that we can actually trace each tentacle around a region. So the advantage of doing something like this is basically you are working with a mesh over a mesh, but once you convert it into these sorts of polygonal shapes, then if I can model some sort of protrusion here, I can actually make that mesh form constrained to this hexagon, right? So that actually helps me to join adjacent pieces so that we can do further subdivision or smoothing operations. But one of the issues that I ran into is that, as you can see, there are hexagons and pentagons as well, so 5-sided and 6-sided shapes. And the first thing I needed to do was to explode these shapes, these polylines, and look for the vertex counts. So you can see here that some of them have 6 vertices and some of them have 7, and that became a way of filtering the script into 2 streams so that we can do the same topological manipulation to hexagonal cells, and we can also do it to the pentagonal cells. And as you can see, what I wanted to do was find the central point and define a normal direction at that point so that we can have a growing tentacle. And that is actually done here so that we can find kind of the point of the mesh at that location, and we can define some sort of a perpendicular vector direction from the surface. Then I used 2 graph mappers, and these are actually nice topological tools where you can, before I do the subdivision, let me actually go here and show you the steps. And I'm going to turn this off. So here, I found the normal direction that we can actually see here. These are the normal directions of these protrusions. And then I manipulated that normal direction using graph mappers so that we can get the hexagonal boundary of this protrusion and scale it down and propagate it along this normal direction so that at the end you can get these sorts of topologies. So these are controlled by these graphs, so I can control the type of section I want for these tentacles as well as the scalar changes that I want. It's a bit slow at the moment because there's a lot of computation going on in the background, but I can quickly change these to change, to control the type of tentacle forms that I want to model here. And in the last step, I also did some lofts to see how the surface closes on itself. So you're seeing that this is missing the pentagons. But for the hexagons, it gave me kind of nice shapes that created these sorts of voids as well. So these tentacles are protruding, but they're also having these cavities. And this is the lofted model, but what I wanted to do was convert it in such a way that we could actually turn them into meshes, and this was actually a bit tedious process. So as you can see, we have polygonal sections here, and what you need to do is you need to create meshes that connect all these polyline edges so that you can have this sort of topology defined by a mesh surface. And doing that required exploding each of these polylines and regrouping them with a lot of data manipulation. And at the end, I created these flat meshes that you can see. So I'm going to hide the loft. And these are the meshed surfaces. And the advantage of this is basically you are defining the topology, and then you can smooth it out or subdivide it, right? So this normal direction is defining the direction for the tentacle, and I can also control how much I want it to protrude. So if I change this parameter to 5, it's going to go a bit more. It's going to elongate a bit more. So it's completely a parametric model. And then in the last steps, this was the top part was for the hexagons, and the bottom part was using the same type of manipulation, but this time for the pentagons. So the only difference is here you get another data stream that you need to model. And then I joined these two together separately so that at the end you get, let me actually bake that to show you, you actually get a form that is like this. So it may look crude, but the point is that we are actually modeling the mesh form that we're going to subdivide further. So this is the beginning shape. And there are also some movements here, but I kind of rolled along with them because you can actually change the graph mapper to control this any way you want. And then in the final step, I decided to give it some color. So let me go back and close these. So here we have the mesh. So the first thing I did was to subdivide it a bit more so that we can get the smoother shape. So here you can see after you input this and subdivide it with the Weaver-Bird loop subdivision, you get a more aerodynamic, smoothed out form, right? So this was the form that I wanted to achieve with these cavities as well. And then in the last step, I did some tricks to give it some colors. So for coloring, I have the first initial mesh that was, if you remember, that was the first subdivided mesh that has a less amount of vertices and faces. So this is the first mesh that I started. And I first exploded this smoothed out shape and then found the closest point on this mesh so that we can define some sort of a distance parameter, right? So if you're protruding more from the surface, then you're basically in a parametric space, so you can get a different hue or color. And calculating these projections, so you can see here there are tons of points. I think at the end I ended up using 81,000 points because of the mesh subdivision. The first thing is you calculate the distances from the original mesh. Then that defined kind of the two bounds for a gradient mapper. And that gradient mapper, you can use it to color the mesh and define it again. So that here you can see that after using this gradient, the closest points to the surface get these hues, and the further away the points, they get these reddish tones, right? So I tried to play around with some color variations as well, so that you can see here the surfaces were given the kind of magenta colors or purple colors, and then cyan and red and yellow. This was kind of an earlier model. You can see I have some issues with the yellow tones here, but then I fixed it with using the input mesh for a distant coefficient. And at the end, I basically try to do other types of visualization. This is probably a bit more extensive, but you can do a lot of other cool stuff with it as well. And I wanted to do this model to make a collage or a Photoshop for a poster that I'm going to show you show you later. But basically, this is kind of the final model that we can output, right? So because we are assigning color to the meshes, once you bake it in rendered mode in Rhino, you can see the full colored form of the virus. And I'll show you one last thing that I think it's pretty cool. So basically, let me hide this one too. You can also control the amount of tentacles you want. So if I go back to the first subdivision here, you can see that this is controlling the number of tentacles. If I add one more subdivision, this is going to take a bit of time, but you will see that we are actually going to have more tentacles protruding from the surface. So there you go. And because I'm using Graph Mapper, the data is somehow normalized, so this doesn't disturb the overall topology of the form that we're going to make. So let me bake that too. So there you have it. So these are the two parametric variations of the coronavirus, and I was able to make this because the virus has symmetrical properties that got me interested in it. So as you can see, I was showing this image earlier, but basically we can turn it into a parametric model as well. So I hope you found it interesting. I was really, this took me quite a bit of time, but it was really really interesting to work on. And I covered some of these tools in other tutorials on my channel. If you want to check them out, please you can visit the links below. And I will show you other types of methods here that I covered as well, like gradient mapper in other videos that will be coming up. So if you haven't checked out the channel, please consider subscribing. I upload videos on parametric modeling tools every week. And thanks for watching.